Hi, welcome to Veterans Forum. PJ Scott here. I was in the United States Navy waves from 71 to 79, whereupon I was discharged at the birth of my first child, who ended up later going into the Navy himself. Now, I'm at Port Townsend, and I've been doing a series of chats with World War II veterans, and now I'd like to introduce Charlotte Frazier, and she is not a World War II veteran, but she has a very interesting World War II story. Now, Charlotte, before we get into your prisoner of war camp experience, let's talk a little bit about your parents, where they were born and raised, and how they happened to find themselves in the Philippines.
My dad was born in Long Beach, California.
Okay.
My mom was born in Ord, Nebraska, and she was teaching down on the river in Rio Vista, California, and was living with one of her aunties. And they were out driving one afternoon and picked up two soldiers in uniform. And my mother always said, "Don't ever pick anybody up." So I never always wondered why. But anyway, my dad went on out to the Philippines, and I don't know if they corresponded or what, but he happened to come back. She had a ring on her finger from another man, put it in her drawer, and went down and met him at the boat. And he gave her the pitch. You either marry me and come back with me now, because he was living in the Philippines, or that's it. And he had started as a chemist with Hawaiian Philippine Sugar, and ended up managing a very large plantation, or some people call them compounds, but we call them plantations. And that was down on the island of Negros in the city of Salai. And I was born in Manila, and then, of course, lived the first 6 years of my life on Negros.
Okay, now are you considered a dual citizenship?
No, because it was American occupation.
Oh, I see.
So I am just an American citizen.
Okay, okay. Now, your family is managing, I assume pretty nicely, a huge sugarcane outfit, but clearly they had to know that the Japanese, some concern I would imagine, and then if they had any speculation, it was over on December 7th, 1941. I'm sure at some point your folks must have shared some of their concerns prior to being captured, or was that something they felt uncomfortable talking about?
Probably uncomfortable. I don't know, because I didn't spend much time with my parents. I had a Spanish governess, and I spoke Spanish till I was 5½.
Oh, I see.
And when we came back, we'd been in the States visiting that summer of '41, and when we came back to the Philippines, the Spanish consulate said, to the governess, "You are not going back."
Oh, okay.
And so we came back, and on the ship is where I started learning English.
Oh, I see.
And I can remember blackouts, and with the black curtains on the walls and all that sort of thing, people also being very quiet, whispering at night, as if that made a difference. And so, yeah, the adults knew what was happening. And then from July to December in '42, we hid up out in the mountains and had a camp out there. And then the Japanese sent word up that they would come get us if we didn't come down, and we figured, or the men figured that meant line everybody up and shoot you. So we
now, how
came down.
many, because clearly they weren't just after your particular family, how many Americans or folks from other countries besides the Philippines did they round up? I mean, they didn't just capture your family, they captured a whole bunch of you, is that correct?
Right, and I don't remember, we were interned 6 months on the island of Negros, and I don't remember how many were there, but the camp at Santo Tomas itself in Manila had over 4,000 people, all creeds and occupations, and lots of British, Dutch. Yeah. And then there were 3 civilian camps in the Manila area. Ours was the biggest.
Now, when your family got word that the Japanese were going to come up and get us, you were how old at this time?
I was 6.
Did you have any sense that, gee, something was really wrong here, or?
No, because I think at that age, as long as you know you have your family, and we were still having lots of food to eat then, and I had all my animals. I had a pet deer, and we had taken one of our dogs with us, and and it was just kind of like camping in a sense, although we did have shacks built. Yeah.
At what point, of course, you are a child at 6, and you was released, what, about 10 years old?
We got home a month before I was 10. Yeah.
At what point in time did you realize, whoa, this isn't home and things aren't going to go back into place for me?
You know, I think at that age, I probably didn't. The studies that they've done on the kids that age, they just kind of rolled with the punches. We were allowed to roam and do as we wish. We had total undivided attention of our parents. And we knew we were loved to pieces, and I think that is what made the real difference. We're not like these kids this day and age in our war situation.
Right.
And we knew, well, the first 2 years it wasn't too bad food-wise, but then after that we knew we were hungry. But, you know, we played and had games. And
so what were your living arrangements like on the prisoner of war camp? Because many of us, I've certainly watched movies, but we all know that the movies' primary is to entertain, not necessarily tell the truth or be realistic. So you were there, but of course we're knowing this is from a child's, this little girl in you gets a chance to speak now, Charlotte. What
they
was your
had
living arrangement?
in Santo Tomas itself. Santo Tomas was founded in 1611 and was and still is the University of Manila. And they put 700 elderly men down in what was the gym. There were 200 men, which my father was one of them, in the education building. And then the women and children were in the main building, and they just cleaned out the classrooms. And eventually we got some cots, and we had an 18-inch space between the cots. And there would be 50 women and children lined up for 3 shower heads and 2 toilets. And the bed bugs quit biting, I guess, because people had so little blood left in them towards the end. But you'd wake up in the morning just covered with bites and things. And
was there any concern about malaria?
No, not that I recall.
Okay.
I mean, if there had been, we'd have all gotten it. Because there was lack of medicine, of course.
So initially you say the food was pretty good. So you got fed 3 times a day initially?
Well, what was happening at first was, because so many people that were put in the camp were from Manila, so the servants were bringing in food, and they were also bringing food in to the other people. And for a while at first, you were allowed to go out and shop.
Really?
In the markets. And then the second year, no more. And of course, we had a huge camp garden the first couple years. And then when people started getting hungrier and hungrier, they ate the veggies and things before they had a chance to mature, so there were no more seeds.
I see.
Then you eat the leaves off the trees, then you eat the bark, and then the trees die because the bark's all gone. And food situation towards the end was really, really bad. As soon as the Japanese knew they were really losing the war, they cut us down to starvation. They'd bring in an old Caratella horse or a carabao, we call them carabaos then, and boil them, and maybe 1 animal would be food for 4,000 people in a gruel, and we got 3/4 of a cup of gruel a day.
Oh my God.
And weight-wise,
I would admit, I was going to say, let's bounce into that. This is, folks, clearly you can see. I'm not as thin as I was in the Navy, but this sounds like a diet no one would want to go on. Tell us how much weight.
Well, my dad was 6'2" and weighed 98 pounds when we got out. And my mom was your height and weighed 86 pounds when we got out. I should have gained 30 pounds. I lost 1, but I made up for it ever since. And that's my only real hang-up. I don't ever want to be hungry again.
Well, I can readily understand that. Now, were you ever privy of rumors going around in camp?
Yes. Yeah.
Well, share some of those.
And, of course, I remember hearing the adults talk about them. And there were, of course, all sorts of things. different, the best in people and the worst comes out in a
Right.
situation like that.
Right.
From prostitutes to hoarders. And as long as anybody did have some money, they were paying then $1 for a can of corned beef, which would have been 10 cents normally.
Right, right.
And that reminds me of my very best Christmas present. I can still see it in a chipped cup, a quarter of a cup of sugar, and a whole egg.
Wow.
All for me. And this was the second year. So then that quickly disappeared and was long gone. Yeah.
Did you hear any rumors that anyone was trying to get you out or making some kind of negotiation?
Towards the end, yes. When we knew that the battle had actually gotten to Leyte, and they knew where we were. Message had gotten out from the main commandant, Japanese, to his people, and mistakenly went to the Pentagon and MacArthur in Australia, and Roosevelt was in Hawaii at that time, and that he didn't care what they did, but they were to get rid of all civilian prisoners. And then that's when Roosevelt started backing MacArthur, sent him supplies and so forth and so on, and that was the huge Battle of Leyte, getting up to us.
Now tell us, before we get to the part where you guys were rescued, thank God, what would be your normal day? I mean, I assume, did you wake up to the sound of a bugle? Was your life really regimented, or because you were a kid there was a little more leeway for the children?
About the only real regimenting that went on was the Japanese delighted at getting you up 1 and 2 in the morning to take roll and make you bow.
Oh.
And of course that's a part of their culture, and it was something that our culture didn't like. You still hear people grumble about that.
Do they actually get up at 1 or 2 to do that?
Get us all out in the hall lined up.
Truly.
Yeah. But aside from that, I don't remember too much regiment. We did have school, and as soon as the paper and the pencils and all that were gone, we then started memorizing poems. And to this day, I hate to memorize. And I don't remember if that was like a 2-hour session in the morning or what. But there were 6 of us that ran around together, and I just remember it being very carefree and having a good time together.
Until you started getting hungry.
Well, and then we played games to see who could find the most in the garbage cans. And then, of course, pretty soon there was nothing in the garbage cans. But then we'd run home with our little find. And we all had shanties. Not everybody, but most people had shanties where you could do some cooking and that kind of stuff, as long as you had anything to cook.
So did most of you live in like in a dormitory sort of situation?
Well, it was in the office or in the classrooms that they cleaned out. Yeah, and that's where
Now, did you get an opportunity to see your father, or were the men?
Oh yeah, no, we were together all day. Yeah, and then each adult was assigned 2 hours of work, camp work, whether it was a garden or cleaning or working in the kitchen or wherever, and that was done by our own people.
Was there rumors about trying to get out? I mean, you hear this in prisoner of war camps for soldiers, but when you've got a family, you know, this is just a total another color here. I don't know. And first of all, where would you go? The whole Philippines is crawling with Japanese or Filipinos who may turn you in to get something. So was there ever...
And we had a 12-foot cement wall all around the school that had been there originally, and then, of course, the Japanese put barbed wire on top of it. I don't recall hearing about anybody trying to escape. I know that because some of our people had little radios and were getting word in and out and that sort of thing, and 2 of the biggest operators were removed one day and we never saw them again. So the Japanese caught on to that, obviously. But as far as any single civilian, I'm not aware of, but that doesn't mean it didn't happen.
I would think that you would have to think a lot longer and harder when you're talking about wives, children,
and I would say most of the people in camp probably were family people, civilians that had been rounded up.
Now, did this create long-lasting friendships way after you left? I mean, you went through a horrendous period of time with these folks. Did this establish real close?
It did through high school. And then one little gal, I lost track of her, but I ran into her again at the February reunion this year.
Oh, okay.
So we struck that.
Okay.
Friendship
Well,
back up.
let's skip up then if we can, because
Sure.
I'm certainly learning that this 27 minutes just goes like a snap. Tell us when MacArthur's men came in and you folks were released.
Well, I'll go back just a little bit. In
Sure.
January, we knew things were happening because our planes were flying over and things were going on. And they would come in and dip their wings and that sort of thing. And it was in January that a plane came in really low and dropped something. And come to find out, it was a pair of goggles. And on the goggles was a note, "Santa Claus is coming, roll out the barrel."
Oh, okay. Wonderful. Wonderful. Okay.
And then, of course, you know, everybody was just ecstatic.
All right, right.
And at the second reunion I went to, there was one of the captains that was talking about all the bridges in Manila had been wired for any troops, our troops, to get across and get into us and save us. And he had crawled on his hands and knees in all the muck and got to cut all the wires.
Oh, wow.
And that's the bridge they came across. And it was evening, and of course, you know, people are just buzzing all over. And by then we were down to about 3,700 people from about 45. And
well, I imagine some people must have died of starvation
oh,
and
they
natural.
were just dropping like flies, and
Right,
beriberi, and
Right.
teeth are falling out because there was no vitamin C and you know,
Right.
all this stuff.
Right.
But then, as I say, it was afternoon, late evening, and you could hear the rumbling, and it was the tanks coming. And I have talked to a fellow that was beside the first tank that broke down our gates. And it was just, it was so wonderful. I can remember sitting on the steps of the big main building singing, "God bless America," and you know, the whole thing.
Do you remember your folks? They must have been
Oh, everybody was just
ecstatic.
just
I would've-
ecstatic, just
Yeah.
out of their minds that we
Right.
were still alive. Yeah.
Right, right.
And they did find in the records that 4 days later we were to all be lined up and shot. Yeah, by the Japanese. Yeah.
So by the hair of your chinny chin,
And by those guys battling so hard on Lady and to get up to Manila, yeah, saved us.
well, my uncle was on the Pennsylvania. I think everybody's heard this. Yeah, my uncle was on the USS Pennsylvania and was a gunner's mate, so he was doing his best to try to get you out of there, along with a whole slew of other folks.
It was just amazing. And then after they actually broke down the gates, there were 45 Japanese that stayed in camp, and they went into the building where my dad was, and of course held them as hostage. And then our troops were shelling in on them. And I forget how many days it was when they finally surrendered and came out.
Now, you experiencing this in your family, did your family come out of that stronger and closer, or did it have the effect of, I mean, you tell me, what was the effect on your family? Because I imagine that's going to vary from family to family.
Oh, family to family, yeah. And my dad and several of the men stayed to get the Central rebuilt and back and rolled. You didn't see my pictures I have out there. Get it back and going, and he got back in February of 46 and died in May of 46. And my mom, I will never forget, she was just a true Victorian square woman. And of course, living out there with the four of us, my governess, my mom, dad, myself, we had 23 full-time servants in our house every day. And when we came home, we lived with my grandmother in Albany, Oregon, and Grandma had a shower for my mother. And every single thing she got was used. And I'll never forget this regal woman just so politely thanking everybody. Because we had nothing. We had the clothes on our back. What there was left of them. And that was it. Yeah.
So I would have to think this prisoner of war experience killed your father. I mean...
Yeah, he had had a massive heart attack when I was 3. And then, of course, they didn't know about blood pressure and all that stuff in 46. And he just had another massive heart attack and walked from about here across the room and was gone.
And how old a gentleman was he when he passed on?
49.
Oh, Lord.
Yeah.
Okay. I have to think the stress. Stress never helps. I don't care what your medical condition is. It's certainly not going to help. So how did you and your mother do then from there on out? I mean, did you stay in the Philippines or you went back to Oregon?
Oh, no, we were in Oregon. Yeah.
Did you have problems connecting with children in the USA who must have found your story absolutely fantastic.
Well, I soon learned that I didn't say anything because even adults wouldn't believe it.
Well, it'd be
so I just didn't talk about it.
It'd probably be very uncomfortable, even if they did believe it. It's like, oh, let's sweep that unpleasant thing under the rug and let's not talk about it.
And I remember once in high school we had to tell an experience that we'd had, and I told about the camp and all, and I got a D because the teacher said I'd made it up.
Oh, God.
Yeah. Yeah. So being an outgoing person, I never really had any trouble getting along. And my mom had quit college 3 weeks before she was to graduate to marry my dad and go back to the Philippines. And so it took her 3 years, summer and night school, to make up to get her teaching degree when she started teaching.
And that is, in fact, what you ended up doing, is it not?
Yeah, because I liked the summers.
Yeah. Okay.
But then it ended up only 6 weeks summer vacation instead of 3 months. Yeah. But since my mom and I had not had all that initial bonding, we were almost like two strangers in the house. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you guys get it together at some point? Oh,
No.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah. And I feel badly, but
everyone makes their choices.
Yeah, and I won't go into all the details, but I know until she had her chemotherapy, I said, okay, I'll take blame for every gray hair you have. But when it came back in white, I said, that's not my doing.
Yeah, yeah. So what
I was terrible.
So you really liked going into teaching because you wanted those summers off?
Oh, at first that. And I've always been a people person, and I like to help people. And So
clearly you got on with your life. I assume at some point you got married, had children.
I have one son. And I have no guilt with only having one because I taught high school for 33 years and worked in a preschool for 14.
Oh, wow. Wow. So as we close here, give us a good memory. Well, you already did that with the Christmas and the cracked teacup and the sugar and the egg. This has clearly impacted your personality, maybe in ways you don't even understand because you were a child. But what do you take away from this? I mean, you're the one who experienced. You tell me.
Well, I think you gain strength. And I was telling one of the people here that at this reunion, one of the gals that was only a couple years older than I am said, you know, that was probably the best thing that ever happened to us. Because we had all these servants, we did nothing for ourselves. She said she didn't even know how to tie her shoes as a teenager.
Oh, wow.
Because her shoes were tied for her every morning. She was never allowed to make a choice about what she was going to wear. This is what you shall wear today.
Right.
And of course had no idea how to even boil water, let alone scrub a bathroom.
Right.
And so she said, it's probably the best thing.
Well,
turned me into a real person.
Yeah, previous to the Japanese capturing, I imagine most of the foreigners were living pretty well.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Now, you brought in a tape or a DVD. Let's show this to the audience. If you want to know more about Prisoner of War Camp Experience, what is the title?
It's called Victims of Circumstance, and it was made by a fellow in Sammamish, and I can't read the name without my glasses on, but it interviews many of the people that live in the Bay Area that were in camp with us. And then it has some of the Filipinos talking, and it's tearjerker at the end with Filipinos.
And I would imagine, was this taped at a reunion?
No, he went down to San Francisco and found these people, and then 2 years ago he previewed it for people at Keyport. Keyport, yeah.
Now you can probably get on your computer and Google up the title and order it for yourself. Charlotte, what's the name of the?
Victims of Circumstance, Santo Tomas Internment Camp.
And that is where you and
my family were.
How many start off with 4,000?
There were about 4,500 at first.
4,500
and then
how many?
3,700 approximately at the end. Yeah.
Now, I would imagine most of the adults that experience that have gone on to their eternal reward. When you go to these reunions, how many people are you seeing that were adults?
Well, there were 360 at this one. Yeah, and that's not counting spouses, and they encouraged us to bring our kids, and which my son went with me and had a great time talking to a lot of the brothers and sisters of people that had been in it. He learned a lot, yeah.
How many children were at the camp? Do you have any idea?
When we first went in with the 4,500 and some, a quarter of the children were under 18, and a quarter of the adults were over 60.
Oh, okay.
So,
Okay, well, I am sorry you had to have that experience, but I'm
Oh,
so glad
yeah.
you were able to join us,
well, and
Charlotte,
as
on
I say,
Veterans
it
Forum.
probably made me a better person in the long run.
Yeah, well,
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
sure you're a delightful lady,
Oh,
and
thank
I'm
you.
glad you came in. Now, folks, we're still at war, and regardless of what your politics are, it's about those that are serving. I would ask you to pray to God for the safety and protection of our soldiers, and pray that our politicians get some real wisdom here. This is P.J. Scott, Navy Waves veteran in the beautiful town of Port Townsend. See you next time, and if you served, God bless you.